It is a deranged, crazed and confused manifesto.
This tight-knit community tonight is in shock, they're in mourning, and the realisation is the answers they're seeking may never actually come. But the big question they're asking here tonight is what drove a school principal and his conspiracy-crazed brother to commit such senseless violence.
They've been demonized in the press, and I can understand completely why that's occurred. And I can understand how the police feel.
We will get to the bottom of this because we need to know what happened and why.
Teaching is among one of the most respected jobs a person can hold in their community. But in some cases, instead of nurturing our children, some teachers hide murderous intentions. Today, we have the case of Ronald Janssen, a highly skilled professional whose life took a turn for the worst after his divorce. He embarked on a killing spree that took 3 lives. Things would only get worse after his arrest, as he revealed to the police the extent of his long list of crimes. Next, we look at the horrific murder of several police officers at the hands of Nathaniel, Gareth, and Stacy Train, who were all in the middle of a bizarre love triangle that included 2 brothers, one of whom had become a dangerous conspiracy theorist. And finally, there are the crimes of Albert Fentress, the psychopathic killer who fell in love with one of the most disturbing films ever made, and then decided to reenact it in real life. These cases will make you question just how much you trust those meant to educate, nurture, and protect all of our children. In The Teachers Who Became Cold-Blooded Killers. This is the face of Ronald Janssen, who is being led away from court after being sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 3 people. He gunned down his young neighbors in a brutal attack and then confessed to another killing while under interrogation. As horrific and heartbreaking as these crimes are, they are nothing compared to the secrets this barbarian hid under the surface that would make this man one of Belgium's most prolific serial killers. But how did a successful and respected teacher turn into a cold-blooded killer? It seems that Ronald Janssen was no stranger to murder from a very young age. Born February 5th, 1971, Ronald Janssen had a troubled childhood full of bullying at school and abuse at home. The problem was not his mother, Hilda, who he was close to. It was his father. In fact, the relationship between the two deteriorated to such an extent that it is alleged that Janssen tried to inject his father with an overdose of insulin in an attempt to end the constant, almost tyrannical behavior the family was suffering. Eventually, his mother and father would divorce, and he and his 3 siblings would stay with their mother. This should have been the start of a successful and peaceful life for Janssen, as in 1993 he both graduated industrial engineering school in Leuven and met his future wife. By 1996, they were living in Genk until Janssen found his first teaching job. He became a professor at Herk de Stad in Lokensburg in 2000, which seemed to be the perfect place to settle in with his wife and 2 children. But by 2006, their marriage had fallen apart, and Janssen was left to live alone while his wife took the children with her. He was described by neighbors as quiet and reserved after the breakup. But underneath the surface, there lay an unhinged and dangerous criminal with a thirst for death. April 2007, less than a year since his wife left him, Janssen was driving his car when he spotted 18-year-old Annick van Justrel riding her bike home. Janssen stopped and forced her into his car, where he would begin an ordeal that would leave this innocent young girl fearing for her life. After driving her to his house, he locked her up in his cellar, and over the next few hours, he would violate van Justrel and subject her to the most unimaginable horrors before he would attack her with a hammer and force her head underwater. Sadly, she did not survive the ordeal, and Janssen had no intention of being caught. He attached weights to her body and dumped her in a canal. Despite the efforts of hundreds of police and volunteers, her body remained undiscovered for almost a year. Van Justrel's mother had called her while she was being held captive in Janssen's cellar, and even though her digital footprint gave them an area to search, her killer managed to slip through the net. Her family would have their questions unanswered for now, but before long, Janssen would strike again, and this time, he would become a wanted man. It isn't clear how events came to a head on the night of January 2nd, 2010, but for some reason, Janssen decided his neighbors would be his next target. And what he did to this couple will shock you to your core. After Shanna Appletons and her boyfriend Kevin Paulus returned home for the evening, Janssen gathered a weapon and some flammable liquids and made his way to his neighbor's house. As they answered the door, he pulled a gun and ordered them into their own car. He would force Paulus to drive while he helped Appletons captive in the back seat. They were on a journey from which they would never return. Janssen ordered Paulus to stop, and when the couple got out of the car, he shot them both. Even if either of his victims had survived the gunshot wounds, they would not have survived his next move, as he placed the bodies in the car and set it alight. Now, with the murder of Van Yastel, Janssen had become very clever to cover his tracks and leave little to no evidence. And here he tried again by burning the clothes he had worn and tossing the weapon into a river. But in this case, forensics won the day, and the killer would not evade police for much longer. After Janssen set his victim's car on fire, the blaze was reported and firefighters found the bodies of Appleton and Paulus. The autopsy revealed the cause of death, and within days, the police had a suspect in custody. That suspect was Ronald Janssen. It took surprisingly little for Janssen to confess. Along with his neighbors, he also admitted to killing Van Yastel. But this was only the beginning of a case that would end with a long list of victims that would leave Janssen as one of the country's most infamous killers. He would admit to a string of murders dating as far back as 1990, but Janssen claims he could not remember the specific details. Police would soon have more to go on as they began to link him to a string of crimes. He had admitted to attacking 5 women and murdering 11 people in total between 1990 and 2010. Police suspected he had many more victims yet to be discovered. Those closest to him could not believe the man that they had spent part of their lives with was capable of such atrocities. His mother, still reeling in shock, spoke about her son.
"I've never seen my son chasing women. He's been a good son. I spoke to him by phone and he said it all happened in a moment of madness. I must stand by him however hard that may be."
And even his wife, who had trusted him with their children several times each week, could not believe the events that had transpired, as she said,
"I always thought he was a kind and gentle man. This killer is not the husband I knew."
It appears the man they thought they knew was a stone-cold killer all along, and had managed to keep his dark desires hidden from those he loved, until he found himself alone. October 21st, 2011, and Janssen was found guilty after a 4-week trial. He would die in prison for taking the lives of 3 innocent people. But the justice system wasn't done with this monster yet, and in 2012, he was brought to face a judge once more. This time, he would answer for some of the attacks and murders the police had pinned on him, and once again, he was convicted. Now, he never received any extra time on his sentence. After all, he was already locked up for life. But it did give the families of his victims the closure they so desperately needed. And we can all sleep a little easier at night knowing this maniac will never see freedom again. Janssen's crimes are some of the most brutal in Belgium history. But in our next case, we see one man go from respected teacher to national villain. And what he did when local police turned up at his house will leave you speechless.
Across the country, those in uniform shed tears for their fallen colleagues, murdered on a routine task.
This is the scene of a barbaric shootout that left an entire nation reeling in shock. Police were led straight to the scene where they walked straight into an ambush and a fearsome shootout. The 3 perpetrators managed to stand off against armed police in what would become known as the Wiambilla killings.
I know people were scared. It was an incident that we don't ever want to see again.
Many of the people here who have laid flowers have been children, too young to understand the true devastation of what's happened, but old enough to show they care.
Stacey Train had only been married a few years and already had 2 children when she decided she wanted to pursue another man, and she promptly left her husband, Nathaniel. The only problem was the man she had left Nathaniel for was his own brother, Gareth. This understandably caused a rift in the family, especially with their father, a pastor who came with some very conservative views. Instead of taking care of their kids between them, they did the unthinkable and simply abandoned them with relatives. It's hard to think of parents doing something so cold, but in the long run, the children would be much safer away from this family. They both managed to make pretty successful teachers, and Gareth kept himself busy as a school groundsman. Together, Nathaniel, Gareth, and Stacey would invest in the Wiambilla property and set about building a life for themselves. In fact, as well as buying a house, the 3 were even registered as living together. Many saw this as a little odd, but nothing that would lead anyone to suspect what they were really capable of. Together, the trio crisscrossed the state, taking teaching jobs at as many as 12 schools over a 12-year period. Despite never staying at each job long, both Nathaniel and Stacey had become popular teachers, and Nathaniel had even featured in several newspaper articles regarding student safety. Then, in August 2021, a tragedy struck, and Nathaniel had to give up teaching. The reason for this? He had suffered a heart attack, and his ex-wife Stacey would take several weeks of leave to help look after him. It would not be long before Stacey also stopped working, and together with Gareth, they would conduct an insidious plan to take their revenge on the authorities they had become so paranoid of.
Multiple complaints about Gareth and Stacey Train were made to the Queensland Education Department. Parents raised concerns about bizarre and inappropriate behaviour.
All this happened as the COVID virus raged around the world. Stacey's school had a policy of mandatory vaccinations, something Gareth vehemently opposed, as he had become entangled in the world of conspiracy theories and enticed Stacey with them. They returned to their new home, where they would live off the grid off the savings they had accumulated. Before long, Nathaniel would visit them, but at the most unexpected time. Nathaniel had not been heard from for months by the time he arrived at his brother and ex-wife's house. After last making any kind of contact around October, his family reported him missing on December 4th, 2021. When the investigating officers went to visit the Trains at their Wiambilla property, they not only had no idea that Nathaniel would be there, they also had no idea what the 3 inhabitants had planned, and they had no reason to be. Nathaniel already had a visit from Queensland Police, as it would later be revealed to the press. They had placed a warrant for his arrest over firearm charges in the months leading up to the murder. At the time, there were no red flags when the officers visited him at home that they were ever in any danger.
Just how you could just hear constantly the guns just going off more and more and more and just getting louder and louder, hearing the police scream and everything else.
It is believed that Nathaniel, Gareth, and Stacey all opened fire on the 4 attending police officers, fatally wounding Rachel McCrow and Matthew Arnold. These brave officers believed this was a routine stop, but as they soon discovered, the sinister trio had far more devious intentions.
It was a very sophisticated surveillance network, and what they had prepared and planned was clearly to take out as many police as they possibly could.
2 more officers were injured in the ambush as the trio unleashed a hail of bullets with every intention to kill.
Bullet holes show the extent of the firefight officers faced.
Tragically, there was a 3rd victim. As neighbor Alan Dare came to investigate the chaotic scene unfolding, it is reported that he was shot in the back in a brutal and cowardly attack.
The former school principal, along with his brother Gareth Train and his wife Stacey Train, executed the officers when they arrived at the Wiambilla property last Monday.
Before long, the much-needed, heavily armed backup arrived, and while officers surrounded the house, Gareth and Stacey decided to broadcast themselves for the whole world to see.
And I can tell you, it is a deranged, crazed, and confused manifesto.
The pair huddled in their basement and made a chilling video that they then uploaded to YouTube. In the video, the paranoid pair claimed that
they came to kill us and we killed them. If you don't defend yourself against these devils and demons, you're a coward.
And this was one of many videos that the couple had uploaded over the months, each as disturbing as the other.
Some of the other videos include excerpts from the Bible, there's bizarre COVID-19 conspiracies, and then there's some weird black and white cartoons as well.
One video featured Stacy as she complained about several welfare and police checks that had been made against them at their home, and even warned police, these fools are stepping into a world of hurt they know nothing of.
Less than 24 hours after Constables Rachel McCrow and Matthew Arnold were honoured at memorial services across the state, more details emerge about one of their killers, Nathaniel Train.
It seems they had dragged Nathaniel into their world of paranoia and mistrust, and together, the three had committed one of the worst atrocities Australia has ever seen, and one that left the nation in mourning. Even their daughter Maddie spoke out about the crimes and reveals the heartbreak she suffers daily.
I mourned 6 people. So I mourned my family, I mourned the police officers, and I mourned the neighbour. Grieving 3 of your family members is hard enough, but then finding out what they did and then seeing everyone's reaction to what they did.
We can never count the true cost. We can never repay the full debt. All we can offer is the humble thanks of a grateful nation.
The Train trio had fallen into the murky world of the internet and became obsessed with the thought that the authorities were out to get them. They planned and executed a massacre that cost 2 brave officers their lives and left an entire country heartbroken.
Letters and cards laid to honour Queensland heroes who were brave till the very end.
This trio of evil are nothing compared to the monster in our next case, who would commit one of the most sick and twisted crimes ever, and all for the love of his favorite movie. This is Albert Fentress, who was a highly respected teacher with both students and parents alike. That was until he became one of America's most disturbing killers. A real-life Jekyll and Hyde, Fentress would reenact one of his favorite movie scenes on an unsuspecting victim in a bloody and brutal attack. This is one case you may have never heard of, but is one you will never, ever forget. Born in Brooklyn in 1941, Albert Fentress was the oldest of 3 siblings. From an early age, he excelled at education and would become one of the top 10 in his school after moving to Long Island. From there, he continued his path to success, obtaining a master's in history and education, and then becoming a history teacher who was especially popular with the students thanks to his fun teaching methods. In May 1976, his home was burglared, which Fentress pinned on a student from the school and even lobbied for an arrest. When other students found out, he became a target of vandalism. Despite his popularity, he remained unattached, choosing to live alone and enjoy his own company. This attracted some unwanted attention towards Fentress, as many questioned why he had no partner, with many making their own assumptions in what was a less than tolerant world. His love of the finer things was known to many, which could have been the motivation for the burglary, as it was known that he had expensive taste. It was this break-in that made Fentress take a drastic action to defend himself and his property. The very next day, he would purchase a .38 handgun. The intention? Protection. But before long, he would use this weapon for a far more chilling purpose. August 1979. Late one evening, 18-year-old Paul Masters was trying to evade police after getting into a fight with some other kids. He ran into the garden of Albert Fentress, a move that would end up proving fatal. Fentress was asleep when the commotion woke him up. This was only a few months since the last incident, so naturally he was still on guard. He grabbed his weapon and went to investigate. When he confronted a terrified Masters, the young man confided in him, and Fentress soon calmed down. He invited Masters inside for snacks and drinks. and Masters would have no real reason to fear Fentress with his good-natured reputation. Masters accepted, and so began an ordeal that will make you sick to your stomach. Things would take a turn for the worst when Fentress introduced alcohol into the evening. Several drinks in, and Albert Fentress would ask an intoxicated Masters to go down to the basement with him to help him move some wood. When Masters turned back, he would come face to face with the barrel of a gun. Fentress had become obsessed with the film Deliverance, which had become one of the most controversial movies on release due to its graphic depictions of violence and abuse. He had become inspired by the movie, and now he had his chance to play it out in real life. He ordered Masters to tie himself up, and when he did, Fentress attempted to violate the no doubt terrified young man, but it didn't work, and he became enraged. Masters watched on in terror as he took a razor blade and cut off his genitals. The sheer trauma, horror, and pain that young man must have experienced is beyond imagination. But the night was not over yet, and what Fentress did next would label him as New York's very own Hannibal Lecter. Taking the severed genitals, he cooked and ate them, all while the victim was still alive in the basement. When he returned downstairs, he shot 2 rounds into Paul Masters' head, bringing an end to one of the most barbaric attacks anyone could commit on another person. As you can imagine, the basement was covered in blood. Fentress tried and failed to clean the mess, and then suddenly, he just stopped what he was doing. What he did next is beyond belief. Calmly, Fentress walked upstairs, picked up the phone, and called his lawyer. He told him what he had done in every sickening detail. The police arrived a short time later. He later told police he had written in his diary days before the murder. That diary entry would set out his murderous intentions. Fentress would tell police he wrote it in a disassociative state, and when he read it back, he was so disgusted he had to burn the pages. And this would become his defense for the case. He would claim insanity as justification for his brutal actions. The community as a whole were in shock. Most people either knew Fentress or Masters, and the details of the crime were difficult for many to hear, let alone accept. The sentence handed down to Fentress was equally hard for many to hear. He was declared not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of a life behind bars, he would be sent to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. His diagnosis was officially classed as narcissistic personality disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and dissociative fugues. He would spend the next 20 years in care until April 1999, when he exercised his right to trial in an effort for freedom. To the disgust of many, he was granted release, and although he was kept under care, he was now a free man. Paul Masters' father was outraged by the decision, telling the media,
"I wasn't angry with the jury or anyone involved in this. I'm angry with Mr. Fentress. He always seemed to be more interested in himself. I never heard him say he was sorry for what he did to my son. I think he's always just been sorry for himself."
Within 3 years, Fentress was back in a secure facility. The reason for this? He still had another confession to make. In 2002, he admitted to abusing 2 boys years earlier. Although he claims not to remember any of the details or names, it was enough for a judge to send him back to a secure facility. He remains there to this day under the supervision of medical professionals and may never see complete freedom for the rest of his natural life. John Oldham, MD, Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences Chairman and Professor, had commented on the mental state of his patient, saying,
"If he couldn't handle kids slashing his screens and burning his lawn, then how could he possibly handle the likely public reaction to his release, after he'd been demonized in the media as New York's own Hannibal Lecter?"
It seems this monster is exactly where he deserves to be. Killers can come from all walks of life, but it is especially heartbreaking when someone we are all taught to trust ends up committing the most horrifying crimes on those they are supposed to spend their lives protecting.